Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Shaw. He is Alex Wolf, and we are once again joined by Matt George of Locked On Kings. Alex, what are we getting into this time with Matt?
Well, last time we talked about De'Aaron Fox, whether he might be of interest to the Knicks, and whether a Julius Randle for Fox trade might be on the table. But this time around, we're talking more about just Julius Randle and whether there could be a trade where the Kings try to pair Julius Randle with De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton to form sort of their own core over in Sacramento, and whether there's a deal that could potentially appeal to the Knicks. And you guys might all be surprised listening. I think that there actually is one that would make both sides fairly happy with how things have gone with the Knicks and Randle so far this year. So I won't hold this up any further. Let's get right into it on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. We want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. I am Gavin Shaw, a play-by-play broadcaster back at it. Got some wrestling next week. That'll be fun. He is Alex Wolf, the editor-in-chief of The Strickland, the greatest Knicks website out there. And we are about to be joined by Matt George, the fantastic host of Locked On Kings, as we just told you, to continue our conversation, specifically on Julius Randle, so I won't hold this up any longer. Here's our interview with Matt George.
We haven't really gotten to Julius Randle yet either. And so we've been sort of tiptoeing around it, but now let's just dive right into the whole Julius Randle discussion. So obviously the Knicks are at a weird spot with Randle right now. We've been talking about it for months. He seems very checked out. It's impossible to miss. We don't want him to be checked out, but it's the writing seems to be on the wall, I guess, that he, for whatever reason, just doesn't feel good on the Knicks anymore or something. Like the way that he plays, the way that he looks on the court. There's been people, taking videos now, like finding little instances of like he's sitting far away from the team in huddles now. He's not helping guys up when they fall over, all these little things. It seems like maybe something is brewing when we now all of a sudden have heard from multiple people last week too, that his name is out there as far as guys that might be available on the Knicks. I feel like that is not an accident that all of a sudden his name is starting to come up in trade talks. And so we had Ian Bagley, the Knicks beat reporter for SNY, bring up last week that Randle might be on the table. Then one of our buddies, CP of Knicks Fan TV, mentioned that he's heard from someone that Randle has been shopped to as many as 5 to 8 teams, and specifically mentioned the Kings as one of them, which was part of what inspired us to want to bring you on today, Matt, on top of just the fun commiseration session. But where would you think that the Kings fall on Julius Randle interest right now? Obviously you already mentioned you don't think that they would be entertaining a Fox for Randle trade because they would look at that as just like, well, what are we really accomplishing here? And I think I agree with you on that, and I agree from a Knicks perspective that I feel like the Knicks would look at that and say, what are we really accomplishing here? Like if we're trading for this guy in Fox, who maybe it's just bad situation or what, but he is playing worse this year, and we'd be committing more money to him than we are to Julius Randle right now, further tightening our options going forward rather than, opening them up more by trading Randle. But there are some intriguing options there. There's a Harrison Barnes on the team, that you could potentially, if the Kings were interested, you could do like Barnes and a pick of some sort, whether it's protected or whatnot. Basically, before we get into actually making mock trades, what do you think that the Kings' interest level in a Randle type player would be?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that the Kings are interested in Randle, but it also doesn't surprise me that the Kings are involved in any conversation. Like the Kings are in a position to where if they hear any remote solid talent is available, if it makes sense, the Kings are going to make a call about it, which again is a breath of fresh air considering where this team was not too long ago, not even trying to make moves like this. I don't know if I like the Kings and Knicks as trade partners, just because both teams are in such similar situations. And I would argue the Knicks are in an even better situation right now than the Kings are, because at least they know that they can get there, and they've been there as early as last season when the Kings don't know what there even looks like. there's a reason why we see typical when there's big name trades happening, it's between a team that is selling and a team that is buying, right? Two teams in very different situations versus the Kings who are kind of on a level, and Knicks who are kind of on a level playing field here, where the Kings are not, or if the Kings are going to acquire Randle, they're more looking to the future and they're not going to sell big today. They're trying to retool. Maybe that team makes a run for the play-in, but they're ultimately looking to build a core that will hopefully make a move going forward. And I think the Knicks would look at a Fox trade at the same or in the same way. So you're basically just doing kind of a, for lack of a better term, a star swap at that point. And I don't know if either team, especially short term, maybe long term, it would be different. And I would argue the Knicks would have a better chance long term of being better than the Kings would have long term in acquiring Randle and getting rid of Fox. But short term, I don't think it moves the needle really for either team that much. So I don't necessarily like the Kings and Knicks as trade partners unless the Knicks are willing, and this is where I want your guys' insight, unless the Knicks are willing to part with Randle for packages that don't include Fox and Halliburton, which I think the Kings would be tremendously interested in that, just like I know the Kings are interested in doing the same with the Atlanta Hawks for John Collins. Randle and Collins both play a position that the Kings need filled, like desperately need filled. And Harrison Barnes has been such a solid player for the Kings. He's been streaky at times, but he's a solid leader. He's a solid locker room guy. The Kings value Harrison Barnes highly. So they're not going to give up Harrison Barnes, who still has more than enough. He has one more year on his contract, but he's got more than another contract in to play. Like, he's in his prime right now. So don't be fooled by Harrison's age, which actually he's not even that old. I think he's like 28, 29 years old.
29,
it feels like he's been in the league for 30 years. I think the Kings would be tremendously interested in like a Harrison Barnes and a draft pick, or Harrison Barnes, another piece and a draft pick type move for Julius Randle. But that's probably the furthest extent that they go.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I can say there's some intrigue there, just because, to Alex's point, things just seem to be so rapidly deteriorating with Julius Randle, where he's sort of saying one thing to like the media and on social media about wanting to be, I mean, the phrase he used was infectious leader, which may be poorly phrased. But he keeps talking about wanting to like be the voice in this team and be the guy who he was a season ago. And yet you see those clips that Alex referenced, like multiple clips now of like teammates falling down around him and Julius just sort of like walking the other way or not being in the huddle. Like, he doesn't seem invested off the court, and he very much, I don't even want to say he doesn't seem invested on the court. The phrase I used last podcast that I'll stick with is he seems lost on the court. Like he just, it's like he got amnesia and forgot that he was that dude a year ago. He was the guy who got MVP picks. He was the guy who made second team All-NBA, because he's not even taking the same shots. And when he is taking the same shots, he went from someone who was so self-assured a year ago to someone who looks like he's praying for the basketball to go in. And I don't really see an avenue for that getting better, because the whole dream with Julius was eventually the Knicks will add another star and he could be that complementary piece. But all we've seen from him this year is an unwillingness to play in that way. And even of late, as RJ Barrett's been playing better and better, Julius has sort of been slotted into that secondary role. And instead of saying, all right, how can I help the team in this role? Probably by cutting off ball a lot, hitting spot up threes, continuing to be a smart passer, but instead of being an ultra deliberate one who has to draw a double team and then pick someone out, just making really quick decisions. I don't know if it's an unwillingness or an incapability, but he hasn't shown himself to be that guy. While Harrison Barnes, if you're looking at, again, what a lot of people claim they want the Knicks to be, which is a team that is figuring out what they have in all their young talent, Barnes is such a seamless piece to slot in there. And he's exactly the kind of guy you were talking about the Kings nominally want more of around Fox, and the Knicks should ultimately want more of. Someone who can shoot and just really doesn't take anything off the table in any other capacity, and is just the consummate veteran presence both on the court and off the court. So I think Barnes, maybe, I don't know if this is too lofty, plus the Kings' first-round pick this year unprotected, and maybe they'd be more willing to do that if they were acquiring Julius Randle and all of a sudden did have semi-realistic, at least play-in aspirations. That would be, I don't know if I'd hard commit to that right now, just because of what Julius meant to this team and the idea that there might be more valuable assets out there for Julius in terms of like future talent and upside. But that would sort of intrigue me. I don't know, Alex, what's your take on that kind of a deal?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, I don't really have anything to add as far as what you said about Julius and about how Barnes would fit with the team. I do think that's the most seamless fit that you can find if you're looking for one, like just from a trade partner perspective, like or a matching salary, matching talent level, whatever, like positionally makes sense kind of thing. I think Barnes makes a lot of sense. He also, from the looks of things, is on a contract that scales down in value, which is useful to the Knicks. Even if it's still, $18.5 million next year, that's still a decent amount of savings, probably to reach Julius's salary level. Actually, considering Julius is on the last year of his first contract with the Knicks this year, I think they would work evenly, so you wouldn't even have to add anybody else. This might be my opportunity to quickly get your scouting report on Marvin Bagley in a second, because I've always been curious about him as a throw-in. But just from the perspective of the trade, I'm kind of with you, Gavin. I think that it would be lofty to assume, based off the fact that, unless the Kings really delude themselves into thinking like, oh, we had Julius, this is it. We're making that playoff push and it's going to happen. So who cares if we give up the draft pick? I don't think that they would even be delusional enough to think like, oh yeah, that's definitely the case. Like this, because it's not like they don't have access to film of Julius this year versus last year. If this was last year's Julius,
the Knicks have hit all of it. They can't find it.
Yeah, right. They've scrubbed all the footage off the
Monty
internet.
McNair's like, oh, can we get some recent highlights of Julius? Like, oh, we just lost him.
So we lost them all. There was a huge data wipe at the IT guy.
Don't check YouTube. He's not on YouTube.
Yeah. The IT guy, he accidentally scrubbed them from the whole internet. But anyway, yeah, I think that I would be on board with, even if it was like Barnes plus, their pick almost protected, sort of like how the Mavs pick is, but maybe with slightly scaling downward protections or something like that. So if it was like top 10 protected, maybe top 10 for 2 years, then top 5 for 2 years, and then conveys as 2 seconds or something like that, I think I'd be down with that. And I think that's fine value for Randle. Barnes is still a great rotation player in the NBA. And to your point, Matt, like he's really not that old, even if he's one of those guys. Like, I feel like Rudy Gay was this guy for a long time where he was perpetually young and old. Like, he seemed like he had been in the NBA for a million years and yet none at all. Probably because he had stopped at a number of teams and, had played for like 3 or 4 different teams by his late 20s. But yeah, so that's basically where I'm at. All right, we're going to just take a quick break. Remind you all that today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. And if yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar and maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good, you'll want to eat it. Unlike other protein bars, which can be chalky or waxy or taste like a chemical spill. You want to eat healthy, but it just gets boring, by around week 3, you're thinking this just isn't worth it. Where's the chocolate? We're at around week 4 right now. So you're probably thinking that right about now. The good news is that Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. And most bars contain just 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 4 grams of net carbs with 17 grams of protein. That is a huge amount of protein for such a little bar. And if you compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of net carbs, and in addition to that, a lot of fat and not much protein, the decision is easy. You want to be eating some Built Bars this year, obviously. And it's going to be the best thing for your resolution to get fit and to build those muscles back up. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and you get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Matt, I don't know where you're at as far as that trade, but also if you want to give me my brief scouting report on Bagley, I've been curious about him too, because I'm curious if you think that he's a guy that's totally a lost cause, or maybe could deal with a change of scenery too, and maybe as a throw-in, it decreases that draft pick haul a little bit too.
Yeah, I'll definitely get to that. The way I look at this is, look at the situation. So Julius Randle and Harrison Barnes player comparison. Julius Randle is the better player, we think, right? Can we universally agree that Julius Randle, and he has obviously the star potential, or he's been an all-star, right? He was an all-star.
Pure talent-wise, he's definitely better. Yeah, he was a deserving all-star and all-team, all NBA second-team player last year.
He's also a player that it sounds like the New York Knicks are not necessarily hungry or desperate to get rid of, but are very interested in getting rid of. And the Kings are more hesitant to get rid of Harrison Barnes unless they're getting better. So edge goes to the New York Knicks in this sense, because the Kings getting the better player in the deal. Contract-wise, Knicks are getting the better contract. The Kings are taking on, like you said, a guy who's just signed his contract. He's going to be under contract for the next 4 years. So you're really committing to Fox, Halliburton, and Randle. This big three is going to be something, which is why I think the Kings would want the flexibility of keeping their draft pick this year to add a young, cheap player who could become number 4 or replace one of Fox, Halliburton, or Randle one day, who's not as financially expensive. Of course, Tyrese Halliburton is not that expensive right now either, because thank goodness he was a 12th overall pick. He's being paid $4 million this year, which is absurd for how good he is and how important he is for this Kings team. So the edge contract-wise goes to the Sacramento Kings in this trade. So it's pretty balanced in that sense. Still, the Kings are getting the better players, so they're going to have to pay for that. I don't think there's any chance that the Kings would include this year's pick in a deal unless it was like lottery protected, meaning it would convey to something else. And I don't think the Knicks would have any interest in that because the Kings are going to be a lottery team. I think Sacramento is smart enough to recognize Julius Randle coming in is not going to get the Kings into the play-in and then through the play-in into the playoffs unless magic happens. So future draft picks, I think there's a conversation to be had, though. I would be, if I'm Monty McNair, if we're negotiating right now and trying to make this trade happen here on our Locked On Network, I'm willing to talk about next year's draft pick, a 2023 first round pick that's maybe only top 3 or top 5 protected. Because at that point, if I'm acquiring Randle, I have Fox, I have Halliburton, and a top pick. I damn well better be not a top or not a bottom 5 team. I better be out of that picture, or everything's been a colossal failure. And at that point, draft pick be damned. So I think that's where I'm at, and that's where I believe the Kings would be at in this kind of conversation. Now to the Marvin Bagley thing, I don't know financially if it works because Bagley's being paid $11 million, I think, this year. And an important note, his qualifying offer is worth around $14 million. However, if he plays less than 2,000 minutes this season and starts less than 41 games, which more than likely he's going to check both of those boxes, that qualifying offer is cut in half to $7 million. So that's important to keep a note from a Knicks perspective. So he's not as expensive to commit to if you were to include him in this deal. But Marvin is in need of a fresh start. And I still think he has all the potential to be a very solid player. He's never going to live up to being a number 2 overall pick. There's nothing that he can do that's going to make that happen. Sorry, as my phone rings in the background.
That's Marvin Bagley's agent.
He's calling me, chewing me out. It wouldn't be the first time they've been upset at me. But Marvin could come to New York and day one be a 15-8, 15-9, maybe even 15-10 guy. He's good enough to put up those numbers just by himself, just because he's just a freak athlete. That part comes easy for him. The question is, can he stay healthy and stay on the floor, number 1? And number 2, is he going to play a lick of defense, which he's gotten better defensively, but he's still a defensive liability. Let's put it that way. So I think the Kings would more than be interested in including Marvin in the deal financially if they could swing that, especially if it means they have to give up less future draft capital. I don't know how interested the Knicks would be in that sense. I think the Knicks would be happy to take Bagley as a low risk, potentially high reward player and a draft pick and a known commodity like Harrison Barnes for Julius Randle. I don't know if the Kings are willing to give all that up. But that's probably where the discussion goes more than in the route of, hey, a 2022 Kings first rounder.
That's fair, and it makes sense. And I think from a Knicks perspective, he would be somewhat superfluous with Obi Toppin, and part of the appeal of trading Julius Randle would be to clear up that time for Obi, and putting Bagley into the Knicks kind of confuses things, as it's not obviously not exactly the same type of player, but there's some similarities in terms of their respective strengths and weaknesses. But Matt, we're running a tiny bit long, so just to wrap things up, do you ultimately think the Kings, and I'll let you define this term as you will, make a significant trade this deadline?
God, I hope so. They need to make some moves. And honestly, the significant is like you said, you can define it in different ways. A significant move in Sacramento might honestly be addition by subtraction. Getting rid of players like Buddy Hield, getting rid of a player like Marvin Bagley. Not that Marvin's been nearly as bad as Buddy Hield, in my opinion. But the Kings, I think, will become a better team just by moving on from some guys that clearly haven't worked. Like, this group has so much talent, should be so much better than they are, but they just do not play together. This group does not work. So just by breaking this group up, I think the Kings immediately get better. Now, at the same time, too, you're not just going to fire sale talent for nothing. So if they're moving on from Harrison Barnes, they're going to want to get a Julius Randle type change gosh, I'm not available. Leave me alone.
Bagley's agent is really mad.
He's
He
really
did
on me
not
right now.
like that conversation.
Maybe McNair's calling me saying, stop giving away our secrets here on this in our conversation. So I'll just kind of wrap it up with this. The Kings need to make moves. The only way Monty McNair, I think, gets fired is if he doesn't do anything, which I think the chances of that happening are very, very low. And I would not be surprised at all if there were phone calls happening frequently between the Kings and Knicks involving very similar discussions to what we've had today.
Cool. Well, that is a great note to end things on. Matty, real quick, just want to remind everybody where to find you online and all that good stuff. Obviously, you can check out the Locked On Kings podcast for more Kings takes and everything. But do you want to let everybody know about anything else?
Yeah. So if you're feeling like you're not experiencing enough misery on the East Coast as a Knicks fan, why don't you tune into the Sacramento equivalent of misery here? Bring your own beer. We'll have a good time. No, we try and have as much fun as possible on Locked On Kings, and I appreciate everybody and their support of that, especially now that we're on YouTube. And I know, like, you guys are on YouTube as well. It's really cool to get opposing fans in to join the conversation as well. Always love that perspective. So I'd appreciate any Knicks fans that come over and want to chat a little bit, especially about a Julius Randle deal. At Matt George Sack on Twitter if you want to follow, and we can just chat anything Kings or NBA basketball there. And guys, I appreciate it so much. I know we're going long, so I do want to sneak one thing in really quick, more for the sake of my podcast than yours. If I were to say, if you're controlling the Knicks, I'm controlling the Kings, and I were to say Harrison Barnes and a 2023 first-round pick, Kings first-round pick, top 5 protected for Julius Randle, do you guys say yes, no, maybe? Where are you at with that?
As of right, go ahead, Gavin.
No, I was going to say I'm a solid maybe on that. It's so hard to gauge what Randall's value is around the league, because I almost feel like there is some executive out there that really loves him and says, this is ridiculous. This guy was second team All-NBA a year ago. That player is still in there. He just needs to not play in a system where there's no shooting around him at all. And if one of those people exists, I think the Knicks could maybe get a better deal. If that person, very reasonably given what Julius has done this year and for the rest of his career, does not exist, I think that's an extremely fair deal for the player that Julius Randle has been for the vast majority of his career.
Yeah, I think I'd probably say, as of right this second, I would say yes. It seems like the relationship between Julius and the Knicks somehow or another is broken, and I don't think it's worth even entertaining for another half a season. To just, it's sort of coming at the detriment of some of their young players at this point. Like now, at this point, if Randall's going to continue playing how he has, you don't want to keep him on the court, sopping up minutes that Obi Toppin could be playing, because we've seen that Tibbs is never going to, reduce Julius's minute load, even if he's playing like crap, or if he seems checked out or whatever. That's just sort of Tibbs's mantra, I guess. It's like, keep trying to get his vets, working, I guess. So yeah, I'm kind of at the point where I would take that deal. And honestly, there's a part of me that almost prefers a 2023 first to a 2022 anyway. And I think that would kind of work well for both the Knicks and the Kings, in the sense that, like you said, then the Kings still get to say, hey, we still get to make our pick this year. That's great for us. Then we don't have to worry about losing the pick till next year. So we get this whole offseason to figure it out and hopefully be better next year. From the Knicks perspective, it's considered to be a less decorated draft this year compared to other years. Next year's looks like it could have some really special talents in it. So from a Knicks perspective, you say, hey, we'll just bet on the Kings being the Kings still, and maybe we get a great draft pick next year. And then you also get Harrison Barnes, who can sort of complement your young players well and help you, do some stuff on the court this year and keep things moving along in a developmental sense, because I think the Knicks could still be roughly a 500 team if they committed to and started practicing a version of the team minus Julius Randle. Because we saw a couple games without him earlier this year where it looked ugly, but I think that was mostly due to the fact they didn't know what to do without him out there, because they're just not used to it. I think if you started scheming for a world without Julius Randle, you could get back to around 500 ball and keep this kind of progress going, especially with a Harrison Barnes out there. So I think I'd be on board with it, to be honest, at this point, which is sad to say, but it's just the truth at this point.
We'll see if they pull it off. If they do, we'll have to reconvene and chat about it. But I wouldn't be surprised if the rumors and the smoke gets hotter between now and the 10th. We'll see.
You and me both. And for everybody listening, Thanks for listening. Hope you made it this far. Thanks for listening to Locked On Knicks. We'll, of course, have a lot more discussions coming up related to the trade deadline and everything as we inch closer, or in some cases speed closer towards the trade deadline here. But keep it locked here on Locked On Knicks. We'll have more potentially with Matt if the Knicks and Kings do in fact make a deal. So we'll have lots of great content coming for you guys. Thanks for listening. Peace out. Talk to you all soon.